At 1:47 in the morning, I stood barefoot in my garage, staring at my husband's red Corvette while my entire future collapsed inside my chest. Just 10 minutes earlier, I'd opened our retirement account and discovered that Michael had drained almost everything we'd saved over 27 years of marriage. The money was gone. Sent to luxury apartments, jewelry stores, and a woman named Vanessa Cole. Meanwhile, my husband was asleep on the couch upstairs, snoring peacefully like a man with nothing to hide. My hands trembled as I pulled his car keys from my pocket. If Michael could steal my future while I slept, then maybe he deserved to wake up and find something missing too. Before I tell you what I did with that Corvette before sunrise, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever discovered someone you trusted, living a completely different life behind your back? Please like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional stories like this, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment because stories like these remind us we're never truly alone. When I married Michael Hunter in the summer of 1997, I truly believed I was marrying the safest man in the world. He wasn't flashy back then. He drove a rusty pickup truck with a cracked side mirror and worked 12-hour days repairing industrial refrigeration units across Ohio. His hands were always rough, his jeans always stained with grease, and every Friday night, he still brought me grocery store flowers, like I was the most important woman alive. We built our life in Columbus one careful step at a time. No wealthy parents, no inheritance, no lucky break. Just two stubborn people trying to survive. I worked as a full-time accountant before Ethan was born. After our son arrived, daycare costs nearly swallowed my paycheck, so Michael and I made the decision together for me to step back and work part-time from home instead. "I'll handle the heavy lifting," he told me one night, while rubbing my swollen feet during my second pregnancy with Lily. "One day, we'll sit on some beach somewhere laughing about how hard these years were." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. For years, Michael was the kind of husband other women envied. He fixed neighbors' fences for free, never forgot birthdays, always held my hand during church. He coached Ethan's little league team and cried when Lily graduated high school. If someone had told me 5 years ago that Michael Hunter would one day steal our retirement savings to fund a younger woman's luxury lifestyle, I would have laughed in their face. But betrayal rarely arrives looking like betrayal. It sneaks in wearing ordinary clothes. At first, the changes were so small, I almost felt guilty for noticing them. Michael suddenly started buying expensive cologne. Then came the fitted shirts, the gym membership, the whitening toothpaste, the long showers before work. At 61 years old, my husband became more obsessed with mirrors than our teenage granddaughter. I remember standing in our kitchen one morning watching him adjust his hair in the microwave reflection. "You've been spending a lot more time on yourself lately," I joked lightly. Instead of laughing, he snapped, "What's that supposed to mean?" The sharpness in his voice caught me off guard. "Nothing," I said quickly. I was teasing. "Well, maybe I just don't want to look old yet." I remember how strange that sentence felt sitting in my chest. Not because of the words, because of the coldness behind them. Michael used to smile at me when we talked. Now he spoke like every conversation was an inconvenience. Still, I ignored it. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, you learn how to excuse almost anything. Stress, aging, money problems, health scares. You convince yourself bad seasons happen to every couple. Then his phone became glued to his hand. Michael had never cared much about technology before. Half the time, he used to ask Lily how to reset the Wi-Fi password. But suddenly, he was texting constantly, smiling at notifications, tilting the screen away from me, taking calls outside, even bringing his phone into the bathroom. One evening, I walked into the laundry room while he was whispering into the receiver. The second he saw me, he hung up. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Work." At 9:30 at night, he stared at me for a second too long before answering. "Big client." That was another thing. Everything became work. Late nights work, weekend trips work, unexplained charges on the credit card, work dinners. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. Then came the Thursday night that changed everything. I was doing laundry while Michael showered upstairs. His navy suit jacket was draped across the guest room chair, and as I picked it up, something slipped from the inside pocket onto the floor. A small white receipt. At first, I almost threw it away without looking. Then I saw the total. $9,184.27. My stomach tightened immediately. I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Diamond necklace, purchased at Hawthorne Jewelers in downtown Columbus. I just stood there staring at the receipt while water ran upstairs through the pipes. $9,000. Michael and I hadn't spent that kind of money on each other in years. Not birthdays, not anniversaries, not Christmas. My mind scrambled desperately for explanations. Maybe it was for Lily. Maybe he bought something for a client. Maybe then I saw the purchase date. 3 days after our anniversary. Our anniversary dinner that year had been takeout Chinese food because Michael claimed business was slow. I heard the shower shut off upstairs. Quickly, I folded the receipt and slid it back into the pocket exactly the way I found it. That night at dinner, I tried to sound normal. "How's business doing lately?" Michael barely looked up from his plate. "Busy. Busy enough to buy jewelry." His fork froze halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. But I saw it. That tiny flicker of panic. "What jewelry?" "The receipt in your jacket." He leaned back slowly. "Oh, that." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear him. "It was for a client. A diamond necklace. Some people expect gifts. What client?" His expression hardened instantly. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm not interrogating you, Michael. I'm asking because we've never spent $9,000 casually. It's a business expense." "Then why wasn't it purchased through the company account?" The silence that followed felt dangerous. Michael set down his fork carefully. "You know, Dakota, not everything requires your approval." I stared at him. Approval. This was our money, our retirement, our future. "I didn't say it required my approval," I answered quietly. "I just thought after 27 years of marriage, I deserved honesty." He laughed once. Not warmly, not kindly. Just sharp and dismissive. "You're getting paranoid in your old age." That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I knew what he was really saying. "You're old. You're insecure. You should feel lucky I'm still here." I barely slept that night. Michael snored beside me peacefully while my mind replayed every strange moment from the past 2 years. The new clothes, the hidden phone calls, the sudden gym obsession, the emotional distance. And underneath all of it, something worse slowly began growing inside me. Fear. Not fear of losing my marriage. Fear that I had already lost it long ago without realizing. The next morning, Michael kissed the top of my head before leaving for work. The gesture felt mechanical, empty. "I'll be late tonight," he said while grabbing his keys. "Big client dinner." I forced a smile. "Of course." After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen, holding my coffee with both hands. Then, I walked upstairs to our office, turned on the computer, and logged into our retirement account for the first time in nearly a year. And that was the moment my entire world began to collapse. I wish I could tell you I screamed when I saw the balance in our retirement account. I wish I could say I threw something or collapsed dramatically onto the floor. But the truth is far quieter than that. Real heartbreak usually is. I just sat there in silence, staring at the computer screen while my coffee turned cold beside me. For nearly 30 seconds, my brain refused to process the numbers in front of me. Then I refreshed the page. Once, twice, 3 times. The balance didn't change. $14,211.63. That was all we had left. My breathing became shallow. No, that couldn't be right. Michael and I had spent 27 years building that account together. We had over $200,000 saved for retirement the last time I checked. I clicked through the transaction history with trembling fingers, and suddenly, there it was. Withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal. $12,000, $8,500, $15,000, $22,000. Some transfers were months old, others were recent. A few had happened just days earlier. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might throw up. I leaned closer to the screen. Many of the transactions were labeled as investment reallocations, but several had direct transfer information attached. Luxury property management, jewelry stores, travel expenses, private transfers. I felt like someone had reached inside my chest and slowly squeezed my heart in their fist. This wasn't reckless spending. This was systematic, careful, planned. Michael had been draining our future piece by piece while sleeping beside me every night. I covered my mouth with my hand as tears finally blurred my vision. Not because of the money, not entirely. It was the humiliation, the realization that the man I had defended for decades no longer saw me as his wife. I was just an obstacle now, a woman too trusting to notice she was being robbed. I heard our grandfather clock downstairs chime 11 times. Michael wouldn't be home for hours. Big client dinner. I almost laughed out loud at the lie. My chest hurt so badly, I stood up just to breathe. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water across my face, staring at myself in the mirror afterward. For the first time in my life, I looked old to myself. Not physically, emotionally. I looked like a woman who had spent too many years making excuses for someone who no longer loved her. But beneath the heartbreak, something else slowly started rising. Something steadier. Anger. I walked back to the office. Then I started printing everything. Every statement, every transaction, every withdrawal. I organized the papers into neat piles like I was preparing taxes instead of documenting my husband's betrayal. Years of bookkeeping had taught me one thing. Numbers always tell the truth, eventually, even when people don't. Halfway through the statements, one recurring payment caught my attention. Cole Luxury Residences. I frowned. The name sounded familiar somehow. There were monthly payments ranging between $4,000 and $6,000 dating back almost a year. Apartment leasing fees, maintenance, parking. My hands froze on the keyboard. Cole, Vanessa Cole. A cold wave passed through my body. No, that couldn't be coincidence. I opened another browser tab and searched the property online. Luxury high-rise apartments in downtown Columbus. Rooftop pool, private concierge, skyline views. I stared at glossy photos of marble kitchens and floor-to-ceiling windows, while remembering how Michael had complained last winter when I suggested replacing our aging dishwasher. "We need to be smarter with money at our age," he had told me. My throat tightened painfully. The apartment website listed average rent prices. $5,000 a month. I whispered the words out loud without realizing it. He bought her an apartment. The sentence echoed through the empty office like something poisonous. Suddenly, every missing piece started fitting together. The late nights, the business trips, the expensive cologne, the gym, the emotional distance. He wasn't trying to feel young again. He already had someone making him feel young. I sank slowly into the chair. For a moment, grief hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. 27 years. Do you know what 27 years means? It means building a life around another human being. It means memorizing how they take their coffee, knowing the sound of their footsteps, remembering every dream they ever shared with you. And somehow, despite all of that, Michael had become a stranger right beside me. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard his truck pull into the driveway. Panic shot through me instantly. I grabbed the papers and shoved them into a manila folder just as the garage door opened downstairs. Michael walked in whistling, like a man without guilt. "You still awake?" he called. In the office, I answered, forcing my voice steady. A few seconds later, he appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. He smelled like expensive cologne and winter air, and something else. Perfume, not mine, never mine. "How was dinner?" I asked carefully. "Long." He glanced at the printer beside me. "What are you doing?" "Paying bills." His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he smiled. That smooth, practiced smile I suddenly realized he used whenever he wanted me to stop asking questions. "You worry too much, Dakota." I stared at him, at the gray around his temples, at the familiar face I had kissed thousands of times. And for one terrifying second, I wanted to scream the truth directly into his face. "I know about the apartment. I know about the money. I know about her." But something stopped me. Maybe instinct. Maybe survival. Because deep down, I suddenly understood something important. If Michael was capable of stealing from me this calmly, then he was also capable of protecting himself before I could react. If I confronted him too soon, he'd move the rest of the money, hide assets, manipulate the children, make me sound unstable. No, I needed to think first. "You okay?" he asked. I realized he was watching me closely now. "Just tired," I answered softly. He walked over and kissed the top of my head. The gesture nearly made me sick. "You should get some sleep." I nodded slowly. That night, Michael fell asleep within minutes. I lay beside him in darkness, staring at the ceiling while my entire marriage replayed inside my head. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every year I spent believing loyalty worked both ways. At around 2 a.m, Michael rolled over in his sleep and mumbled something I couldn't fully hear. Then, one word became clear. "Vanessa." I closed my eyes, and somehow, that hurt even more than the missing money. The next morning, Michael left early for another meeting. The second I heard his truck disappear down the street, I walked into the kitchen and opened the folder again. This time, I examined the transfer documents more carefully. That's when I noticed something strange. Several approval signatures had my name attached. Dakota Hunter, my authorization, my consent. But I had never signed any of them. I stared at the electronic signatures for a long time. Then a terrifying realization crept over me. Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He may have forged my name to do it. And suddenly this situation became far bigger than a cheating husband. For 3 days, I became someone I barely recognized. I lied to my husband. I smiled when he kissed my cheek. I asked about his day while secretly documenting every suspicious charge connected to our bank accounts. And every night, after Michael fell asleep, I sat alone in the office, gathering evidence against the man I had once trusted with my entire life. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was pretending I still didn't know. There's something deeply humiliating about sitting across from a person who thinks they're successfully deceiving you. You begin replaying every conversation differently. Every compliment sounds fake. Every touch feels rehearsed. Every smile becomes suspicious. By Friday morning, I couldn't stand wondering anymore. I needed to see her. Not online, not through transaction records, in real life. So, after Michael left for work, I drove downtown toward Cole luxury residences with my stomach tied into knots. The building looked nothing like the life Michael and I had built together. It was sleek, modern, cold. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows reflected the gray Ohio sky, while luxury cars lined the entrance like a showroom. I sat across the street, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Part of me still hoped I was wrong. Maybe Vanessa Cole was a business partner. Maybe the apartment belonged to a client. Maybe. Then Michael's black truck pulled into the parking garage. My heart dropped instantly. He had told me he was spending the day visiting equipment suppliers outside Columbus. I watched him step out wearing the navy coat I bought him 2 Christmases earlier. The same coat he wore to Lily's college graduation. The same coat I once wrapped around myself during a snowstorm while he laughed and held me close. Now, he wore it for another woman. I felt physically sick. Michael walked confidently toward the entrance, carrying a white bakery box. Pastries. He never brought pastries home anymore. About 10 minutes later, she appeared. Vanessa Cole. 30-something, tall, perfect blonde hair falling over the shoulders of an expensive cream-colored coat. She walked toward Michael smiling before he even reached her. And then she kissed him. Not quickly, not secretly, comfortably, like they had done it 100 times before. I stopped breathing for a second. The entire world around me became strangely silent. Cars moved. People crossed the street. A bus passed nearby. But all I could see was my husband touching another woman like she belonged to him. Vanessa laughed at something he said and leaned against his chest while he wrapped an arm around her waist. My stomach twisted violently. Michael used to hold me like that. Before life became bills and responsibilities and aging parents and mortgage payments. Before I became invisible. I don't know why that thought hurt most of all. Not the affair itself. The realization that somewhere along the way, Michael stopped seeing me as a woman entirely. Vanessa turned slightly and sunlight caught the necklace around her throat. Diamond. Small but elegant. My vision blurred immediately. The necklace from the receipt. $9,000. I stared at it while memories flooded my head all at once. The year Michael told me we couldn't afford a vacation. The Christmas he suggested cutting back on gifts. The dishwasher we never replaced because he claimed retirement planning mattered more. All those sacrifices, all those careful choices. Meanwhile, he was building another life in secret. A younger life. A prettier life. One funded by the future we built together. Michael and Vanessa walked toward a nearby cafe holding hands. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and took pictures through the windshield. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped it. Photo after photo. Proof. Real proof. No excuses. No misunderstandings. No way for Michael to twist this into paranoia or insecurity. I should have driven away then. Any sane woman probably would have. But I couldn't move. Something inside me needed to know how deep this betrayal really went. So I stayed. Nearly an hour later, they returned to the apartment building carrying shopping bags. Michael looked relaxed, happy. You know what destroyed me most. He looked younger around her, lighter. Like the weight of our marriage disappeared whenever she smiled at him. As they reached the entrance, Vanessa touched his chest gently. I cracked my window slightly without realizing it. That's when I heard her. "When are you finally going to tell her?" My entire body froze. Michael glanced around before answering quietly. "Soon. You said that 6 months ago? I'm handling it." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "I'm tired of hiding, Michael. You won't have to much longer." Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Dakota suspects nothing." I physically flinched. Not because he lied, because of how easily he said it, how casually, as if I were some foolish old woman too blind to notice my own life disappearing. Vanessa crossed her arms. "What about the house?" "We'll figure it out after the divorce." Divorce. The word hit me like a punch to the chest. Michael was planning our divorce while sleeping beside me every night. And somehow, despite everything, he still hadn't told me. He intended to keep using our savings until the moment he walked away. Vanessa lowered her voice, but I still caught enough. "You promised me we'd be in Florida by summer." "We will. And the condo, I already told you it's yours." The condo, the apartment, the jewelry, the trips. All of it paid for with money Michael once promised would protect us when we grew old together. Tears burned my eyes, but something surprising happened then. The grief began hardening into something else. Something colder, more dangerous. Because sitting there watching them together, I suddenly realized something important. Michael didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. He wasn't conflicted, wasn't confused, wasn't trapped between two women. He had already emotionally left our marriage long ago. He just wanted to keep using me financially until everything was secure for him. That realization changed me. I stopped thinking like a heartbroken wife and started thinking like a woman being robbed. Vanessa kissed Michael again before heading inside. Once she disappeared through the lobby doors, Michael stood alone checking his phone. For one brief second, I considered stepping out of my car. I imagined walking straight across the street and slapping him in front of everyone. I imagined screaming, throwing the photos in his face, demanding answers. But then another thought came quietly into my mind. If Michael was willing to steal from me this calmly, then he was already preparing for war. And angry people make mistakes. Emotional people lose leverage. I couldn't afford either. Not now. So instead, I lowered my phone carefully and took one final picture of my husband standing outside his mistress's luxury apartment. Then I started the engine. As I drove home through downtown Columbus, my tears finally stopped. Not because the pain disappeared, because something inside me had shifted permanently. The woman who left that house earlier that morning still believed her marriage might somehow survive. The woman driving home now understood something terrifying. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was building a new future using the ruins of mine. And for the first time in 27 years, I realized I would have to protect myself from the man sleeping in my bed. By Sunday evening, I had mastered the art of pretending my heart wasn't broken. That was the terrifying thing about betrayal. After enough shock, your body simply adapts. You still cook dinner, still fold laundry, still ask whether someone wants more coffee while your entire inner world burns to the ground. Michael spent the weekend acting unusually cheerful. Now I understood why. He was in love. Not with me. With the fantasy version of himself Vanessa Cole made him feel. Young, desired, important. Meanwhile, I had become part of the wallpaper in his life. Useful, familiar, easy to ignore. Sunday dinners used to mean something in our family. Even after Ethan and Lily moved out, we still gathered twice a month at our house in Columbus. Michael insisted on keeping the tradition alive. The irony almost made me sick. A man secretly planning to abandon his wife still wanted applause for being a family man. Around 4 in the afternoon, I stood in the kitchen mashing potatoes while Michael grilled steaks outside. Through the window, I watched him laugh to himself while texting on his phone. I already knew who he was talking to. That knowledge changed everything. Every smile became offensive. Every laugh sounded fake. The front door opened a little after 5. Mom Lily called. "In the kitchen, sweetheart." Lily walked in carrying a peach pie from the bakery near her apartment. At 32, my daughter still hugged me the same way she did when she was little, tight, and full of warmth. "You look tired," she said quietly after pulling away. I forced a smile. "Just haven't been sleeping well." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Migraine again." Something like that. Before she could ask more questions, Ethan entered behind her with his wife Claire. Ethan had Michael's height and stubbornness. Sometimes, even his tone sounded painfully similar to his father's. "Smells good in here," he said, while kissing my cheek. For a moment, watching my children together almost broke me. Because suddenly, I realized Michael wasn't just destroying our marriage. He was about to destroy the foundation of this entire family. And somehow, they still had no idea. Dinner started normally enough. Steaks, potatoes, cornbread. Michael pouring wine like the perfect husband, hosting the perfect family evening. If someone had taken a picture of us that night, they would have seen a beautiful American family. Not a man financing his mistress's luxury apartment behind his wife's back. Not a woman secretly documenting financial fraud. Not a marriage already bleeding internally. Halfway through dinner, Michael's phone lit up beside his plate. I saw the name instantly. Vanessa. My stomach tightened. Michael flipped the phone over so quickly it was almost comical. But not before Lily noticed my expression. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine." Michael cleared his throat. "So, Ethan, how's work been?" The conversation moved on, but I barely heard any of it, because Michael's phone vibrated again, then again, then again. Each vibration felt like another slap across my face. Finally, Ethan laughed. "Dad, somebody's really trying to reach you." Michael forced a smile. "Work stuff never ends." Claire shook her head sympathetically. "That's why I could never run a business." I stared at Michael while he cut his steak calmly. How many lies could one person tell before they stopped recognizing themselves? Lily suddenly looked toward the garage through the kitchen window. "Dad, is that the new Corvette?" Michael's entire face brightened immediately. That stupid car. That bright red Corvette sitting in our garage like a trophy purchased with stolen dreams. "Sure is," he said proudly. "Want to see it after dinner?" "You actually bought it?" Ethan asked. Michael grinned. "Worked hard my whole life. Figured I deserved something fun before I get too old." Too old. The same man who told me we needed to tighten spending had bought himself a luxury sports car while funding another woman's lifestyle. I nearly crushed my wine glass. "How much was it?" Lily asked casually. Michael shrugged. "Less than you'd think." Lie. Everything out of his mouth sounded poisonous now. Ethan laughed. "Mom probably hates it." Normally, I would have smiled, teased Michael about his midlife crisis. But that night, something sharper slipped out before I could stop it. "Your father's been spending a lot of money lately." The table went quiet. Michael looked at me instantly. Not confused. "Warning me." Lily frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," Michael answered quickly. "Your mother just worries too much." There it was again. That phrase. "Your mother is emotional." Your mother is paranoid. Your mother doesn't understand finances. A convenient little narrative he'd probably been building for months. I set down my fork carefully. I think when people share a life together, I said calmly, they should probably discuss major financial decisions. Michael's jaw tightened. We've discussed everything necessary. No, I replied softly. We really haven't. The tension at the table became immediate. Claire stared down at her plate awkwardly. Lily looked between us nervously, but Ethan sighed with visible frustration. Dad works hard. If he bought a car, who cares? That hurt more than I expected. Not because Ethan meant harm, because he sounded exactly like Michael, dismissive, protective of male ego before female pain. I swallowed hard. It's not about the car. Then what's it about? Michael interrupted before I could answer. Dakota's been stressed lately. I looked at him in disbelief. He smiled at our children like a patient husband dealing with an unstable wife. And suddenly, I saw the future he'd planned. He would leave me eventually. And when he did, I'd become the bitter older woman who imagined problems. The insecure wife. The emotional burden. Meanwhile, he'd ride off into the sunset with Vanessa, looking like the victim of an unhappy marriage. The realization made my skin crawl. Lily reached for my hand gently. Mom, I forced myself to smile. I'm okay, sweetheart. But Michael kept watching me carefully now. Because for the first time, I think he sensed something had changed. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room, while Michael proudly dragged Ethan outside to admire the Corvette. Through the window, I watched Michael running his hand along the glossy red paint while Ethan laughed. Like two boys. Like nothing ugly existed underneath any of this. Lily stood beside me quietly. You and Dad fighting? I hesitated too long. Her expression softened immediately. Oh my God, you are. It's complicated. Did he do something? My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her everything right then. The affair, the stolen retirement money, the lies. But Evelyn's voice from our phone consultation earlier echoed in my head. Do not confront him until you've protected yourself financially. So instead, I shook my head carefully. Marriage gets heavy sometimes. Lily hugged me again, and for one dangerous second, I almost broke down completely, because my daughter still thought my pain came from ordinary marriage problems. Not betrayal, not humiliation, not theft. Later that night, after everyone left, Michael locked the front door and turned toward me. The warmth from dinner vanished instantly from his face. What the hell was that supposed to mean earlier? I folded dish towels slowly. What part? The comments about money. I was telling the truth. Michael stepped closer. You need to stop acting paranoid around the kids. I stared at him. Paranoid. The word finally snapped something inside me. Not loudly, quietly, permanently. Because a man who could look directly into my eyes after stealing from me, cheating on me, and lying to our children, was no longer a man I recognized at all. And for the first time since discovering the affair, I stopped hoping my marriage could somehow survive. 3 days after that family dinner, Michael brought home the Corvette. Not quietly, not modestly, like a teenage boy showing off his first trophy. I heard the engine before I saw the car. The loud growl echoed through our quiet neighborhood just after noon while I was folding towels in the laundry room. At first, I thought someone had gotten lost on our street. Then I looked through the window and saw Michael slowly turning into our driveway behind the wheel of a bright red Corvette convertible. For a moment, I genuinely thought my husband had rented it. There was no way the man who spent months lecturing me about being financially careful had actually purchased something like that. But the second Michael climbed out grinning like he'd won the lottery, I knew. My chest tightened instantly. He walked into the house carrying himself differently, straighter, prouder, like he'd become someone else entirely. "Well?" he asked dramatically. "What do you think?" I stared at him from the kitchen doorway. "How much did you spend?" His smile faded slightly. "That's your first question?" "Yes." Michael tossed the keys onto the counter casually. "It's not a crime to enjoy life, Dakota." That didn't answer my question. He sighed loudly, already irritated. "Why does everything have to become a problem with you lately? Because you stole our retirement savings to impress a woman young enough to be your daughter." But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I walked toward the window and looked outside at the Corvette sitting in our driveway like a scarlet warning sign. Beautiful, flashy, expensive, and completely ridiculous for a 61-year-old man drowning in lies. "It's a lot of car," I said carefully. Michael smirked. Maybe I finally decided I deserve something for myself. The irony nearly made me laugh. For himself. As if he hadn't already taken everything. That afternoon, Michael spent nearly 2 hours in the garage polishing a car that already looked brand new. I watched him through the kitchen window while pretending to read recipes. There was something almost pathetic about the way he touched that Corvette. Tenderly, proudly, like it represented freedom. Meanwhile, all I could see was betrayal painted in glossy red. Later that evening, Michael called me into the garage. "Come sit in it. I'm fine. Dakota, come on." Reluctantly, I walked out there. The garage smelled like motor oil, expensive leather, and the cologne Michael suddenly wore too often these days. He opened the passenger door dramatically. "Feel that." I sat carefully inside. The interior looked more luxurious than anything we owned. Michael grinned. "Not bad, huh? It's expensive. You keep saying that like it's a dirty word." I turned toward him slowly. "When exactly did we decide spending this kind of money made sense?" His expression hardened instantly. "There you go again." "Again what?" "Acting like I need permission." I stared at him. 27 years together, 2 children, a shared life, and somehow asking about major financial decisions now counted as controlling. "You used our retirement money, didn't you?" I asked quietly. Michael laughed sharply. "My God, Dakota, you sound insane lately." Insane, paranoid, emotional. He kept using words designed to make me question myself instead of him. But this time, I was prepared. I saw the withdrawals. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then came the performance. The exhausted husband dealing with the irrational wife. Those funds were moved around for investment purposes, into a sports car. You don't understand how assets work. I almost admired the confidence of his lies. Almost. Michael leaned against the Corvette casually. "You know what your problem is?" I folded my arms. "You think being cautious is the same thing as living. That money was for our future. And I'm still alive right now," he snapped. "I'm tired of acting 80 years old before I have to." There it was again. Youth, freedom, escape. Everything Vanessa represented. Meanwhile, I represented responsibility. Bills. Reality. Aging. Michael suddenly tossed me the keys. "Go ahead. Start it." I caught them automatically. I don't want to drive it. "Why not?" "Because it's ridiculous." His eyes narrowed. "No, you know why. Because you're scared. Excuse me. You've spent your whole life afraid to enjoy anything." I stared at him in disbelief. This man had watched me sacrifice career opportunities, vacations, jewelry hobbies, and sleep to support our family for decades. And now he was rewriting history like I'd chosen smallness. "You know what's funny?" he continued. "You used to be fun." The cruelty of that sentence settled slowly into my chest. Used to be. Not anymore. Not after children. Not after bills. Not after I gave my youth to our marriage, while he secretly searched for a younger replacement. Michael pointed toward the driver's seat. Go on. I said no. Probably for the best, he muttered. That much horsepower might be too much for you anyway. I looked at him sharply. What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged. Nothing. Just saying these cars require fast reflexes. Translation? You're old. Again. Always the same message underneath everything now. I handed him the keys. You're unbelievable. As I turned to leave, Michael called after me casually. And Dakota, I stopped. Don't touch the car without asking me first. I slowly turned back around. What? It's expensive. I don't want accidents. For a second, I genuinely couldn't speak. The house was in both our names. The retirement account belonged to both of us. That car had been purchased using marital assets. And somehow, Michael still spoke to me like I was a reckless child, lucky to exist in his world. I walked back into the house shaking with rage. Not loud rage, the dangerous kind. The kind that grows quietly. That night, Michael fell asleep early after drinking bourbon in his recliner while watching car videos online. Around midnight, I walked downstairs for water and noticed his wallet sitting on the kitchen counter. Normally, I would never invade someone's privacy like that. But normal had died the moment Michael chose Vanessa over our marriage. I opened the wallet carefully. Inside was a folded envelope from the dealership. Heart pounding, I carried it into the office and shut the door softly. The paperwork confirmed exactly what I already suspected. The Corvette cost nearly $90,000. $90,000! I felt dizzy reading the number, but then something else caught my attention. The financing and registration forms. Several documents required both marital signatures because of the account used during purchase. My eyes narrowed immediately. Dakota Hunter. Electronic authorization confirmed. Except I had never signed anything. Not digitally, not physically. I examined the signature carefully. It looked similar enough to fool a dealership employee, but not me. The loops were wrong. The spacing was off. Michael had forged my signature. A cold chill spread through my body. This wasn't impulsive anymore. This was calculated deception. I quickly photographed every page with my phone before returning the envelope exactly where I found it. Then I sat alone in the dark office staring at those photos while rain tapped softly against the windows. Michael wasn't just cheating. He was committing fraud to finance his new life. And suddenly, the Corvette stopped looking like a sports car to me. It became evidence, leverage, maybe even justice. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something besides heartbreak. I felt dangerous. I spent 4 days debating whether I was really the kind of woman who hires a divorce lawyer in secret. At 62 years old, that wasn't how I imagined my life would look. I had always believed marriages were supposed to survive hard seasons. You work through problems. You forgive mistakes. You stay. That's what women from my generation were taught, especially women like me. Women who built entire identities around loyalty. But every time I started doubting myself, I remembered the look on Michael's face when he called me paranoid. Not guilty, not ashamed, annoyed. Like my pain was inconveniencing him. And somehow, that hurt even worse than the affair itself. So on a rainy Tuesday morning, while Michael believed I was meeting Lily for coffee, I parked outside a brick office building in downtown Columbus and walked into the law offices of Evelyn Brooks. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my purse. The receptionist smiled politely. Mrs. Hunter, I nodded. She's ready for you. The hallway smelled faintly like coffee and old books. Framed legal degrees lined the walls beside photographs of Evelyn Brooks shaking hands with judges and city officials. I suddenly felt completely out of place, like a scared little girl pretending to be brave. Then Evelyn herself opened the office door. She looked to be in her early 60s, with silver blonde hair cut sharply at her shoulders and intelligent gray eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "Dakota Hunter?" she asked warmly. "Yes." She shook my hand firmly. "Come in." Her office overlooked downtown Columbus through massive windows streaked with rain. For a moment, I forgot why I was there. Then Evelyn gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "What's going on?" And just like that, I nearly broke apart, because no one had asked me that sincerely in a very long time. I sat down, slowly clutching my folder against my chest. "My husband is having an affair," I whispered. Evelyn didn't react dramatically, didn't pity me, didn't interrupt. She simply nodded once. "How long have you known?" "About 2 weeks. And how long do you think it's been happening?" "At least a year. Maybe longer." Evelyn folded her hands carefully. "What made you come see me today instead of confronting him?" I hesitated. Then I opened the folder. One by one, I laid everything across her desk. Bank statements, photos of Michael and Vanessa, retirement withdrawals, apartment payments, the forged signatures, the Corvette paperwork. Evelyn's calm expression slowly changed as she examined the documents. Not shock, concern, professional concern. Finally, she removed her glasses and looked directly at me. "Dakota, did your husband authorize these transfers with your knowledge?" "No." "You never signed these documents?" "Never." Evelyn leaned back slowly. "Well," she said carefully, "this is significantly more serious than infidelity." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She tapped the paperwork lightly. "If these signatures are fraudulent, and they appear to be your husband, may have exposed himself to legal liability beyond divorce court." The room suddenly felt colder. I stared at her. "I don't want him arrested." "That's not what I'm saying." Evelyn's voice softened slightly. "But what Michael did potentially qualifies as financial misconduct during marriage. Possibly fraud depending on how the accounts were structured." I looked down at my hands. For some reason, hearing a professional confirm, it made the betrayal feel more real than ever. Michael didn't just hurt me emotionally. He violated me financially, legally, personally. Evelyn continued reviewing the documents. "How much remains in the retirement account?" "About 14,000. She nodded grimly. "And the Corvette was purchased recently last week? With marital funds?" "Yes." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me carefully. "Dakota, I need to ask you something difficult." "Okay. Are you emotionally prepared for the possibility that your marriage is already over?" The question knocked the air out of me. Not because I hadn't thought it, because someone finally said it out loud. I stared toward the rain-covered windows, fighting tears. I don't even recognize him anymore. Evelyn's expression softened for the first time. That's usually when people end up in my office. Silence settled between us briefly. Then she asked the question I'd secretly feared most. "Do your children know no?" "Why not?" "Because I don't know how to destroy their image of their father." My voice cracked on the last word. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I understand." I wiped my eyes quickly, embarrassed by my emotions. "I feel stupid. Why I didn't see it sooner." Evelyn's face hardened instantly. "No, do not do that to yourself." I looked up. She leaned forward slightly. "Trusting your husband of 27 years is not stupidity. His deception is the problem here, not your loyalty." I nearly started crying again, because after weeks of being treated like I was irrational, hearing someone validate my reality felt overwhelming. Evelyn organized the papers into neat stacks. "Here's what concerns me most," she said. "Your husband appears to be moving marital assets before formally ending the marriage." "What does that mean?" "It means he's trying to protect his future at your expense." Exactly. That was exactly what this felt like. Evelyn continued. "If Michael drains everything before divorce proceedings begin recovering, those assets becomes more complicated." Fear crept into my chest. "So what do I do?" "You stop reacting emotionally." I blinked. Evelyn's voice became calm and precise. "You document everything. You protect yourself financially. And most importantly," she paused, "you stop underestimating your position." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She slid the Corvette paperwork toward me. "Your husband made a mistake." I stared at the documents. The forged signature? That too. But also this vehicle purchase. Evelyn pointed at the financing agreement. He used marital funds tied to shared accounts. Legally speaking, that Corvette is not solely his property. My heart started beating faster. "I don't understand." "It means your husband doesn't have the unrestricted authority he thinks he has." I stared at her carefully. Then a dangerous thought entered my mind for the first time. What would happen, I asked slowly, if the car disappeared? Evelyn looked at me over the top of her glasses. For one long second, neither of us spoke. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. "That depends entirely," she said carefully, "on who legally possesses it." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because suddenly I realized Michael wasn't as untouchable as he believed. Evelyn stood and walked toward a small cabinet beside her desk. "Coffee." "Yes, please." As she prepared 2 cups, she spoke calmly over her shoulder. "Dakota, I've been doing this job for 32 years. I accepted the coffee gratefully. "And do you know what men like your husband almost always assume? What that women who spent decades caring for families won't fight back intelligently." Something dark and steady settled inside me. Because she was right. Michael thought I was weak, predictable, emotional, old. He thought I'd cry, beg, and panic while he quietly secured his new life with Vanessa. But sitting in Evelyn Brooks's office, surrounded by evidence and legal strategy, I began feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Evelyn handed me a business card. "There's a dealer outside the city I trust for discreet asset evaluations if necessary." I stared at the card. My pulse quickened. "You really think I should do this?" Evelyn held my gaze steadily. "I think your husband already made his decision about protecting you." The drive home felt surreal. Rain blurred across my windshield while Evelyn's words replayed endlessly in my head. "You stop underestimating your position." By the time I pulled into my driveway, Michael's Corvette sat gleaming in the garage like a monument to his arrogance. And for the first time since discovering the affair, I didn't look at that car with pain anymore. I looked at it with purpose. The night I took Michael's Corvette, my husband came home smelling like whiskey and expensive cologne. It was almost 11. I was sitting alone in the living room pretending to read a book when I heard the garage door rumble open. Michael stumbled slightly as he walked inside. Not falling down drunk, just careless, loose, overconfident, the kind of drunk a man becomes when he thinks he's winning. "You're up late," he said while tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter. "I couldn't sleep." He loosened his tie and smiled lazily. "You should try bourbon. Works wonders." I watched him carefully. There was lipstick faintly smeared near the collar of his shirt. Not bright enough for him to notice, but enough for me. Funny how men who become experts at lying still overlook the smallest details. "How was your evening?" I asked calmly. "Business dinner." The lie came automatically now. Smooth. Effortless. Michael didn't even hesitate anymore. He walked to the refrigerator, grabbed bottled water, and drank half of it without looking at me. "You know," he said casually, "Vanessa thinks I should take the Corvette down to Florida sometime." The world inside me stopped for a second. He had never mentioned Vanessa's name before. Not once. I stared at him carefully. But Michael seemed too distracted to realize what he'd done. His eyes widened slightly. Then he laughed awkwardly. "Vanessa from accounting, one of the vendors." The speed of the lie told me everything. I closed my book slowly. "You okay, Michael? Why wouldn't I be?" "You seem nervous." His expression hardened immediately. "I'm tired, Dakota, not nervous." Then, just like always, irritation replaced guilt. Because angry men rarely feel cornered when they think they still control the situation. Michael grabbed his phone from the counter. It lit up instantly. Vanessa. Even from across the room, I saw the name. He turned the screen downward too late. Again. "Big client?" I asked softly. Michael stared at me for one long second. Then he sighed dramatically. "I cannot keep doing this. Doing what this suspicious interrogation every night." Interrogation. Such an interesting word for simple questions between husband and wife. I asked how your evening was. "You're turning everything into a fight lately." I almost laughed. He had drained our retirement account, bought his mistress an apartment, forged my signature, lied to our children. And somehow I was the problem because I asked about dinner. Michael rubbed his forehead dramatically. "I'm exhausted." Then he headed upstairs. Halfway up the staircase, he paused. "Oh, and don't forget." I looked up. "I'm taking the Corvette out early tomorrow morning." Of course he was. Probably to Vanessa. "Okay," I answered quietly. Michael disappeared upstairs a moment later. I stayed perfectly still until I heard the shower running. Then I stood slowly and walked into the kitchen. The Corvette keys still sat beside the fruit bowl. My pulse quickened immediately. Not yet. I forced myself to stay calm. The plan Evelyn and I discussed was precise. No emotional decisions. No reckless confrontation. Everything clean. Everything documented. I picked up the keys carefully. They felt heavier than they should have. Like they represented far more than a car. Because they did. That Corvette was Michael's pride. His fantasy. His proof to himself that he still mattered. And tomorrow morning, it would be gone. I slipped the keys into my sweater pocket just as the shower upstairs turned off. Then I calmly returned to the couch with my book. Michael came downstairs 20 minutes later, wearing sweatpants and carrying a glass of bourbon. "Still awake?" "Mm-hmm." He settled into his recliner and turned on television highlights from some car auction show. Corvettes. Of course. For nearly an hour, Michael rambled drunkenly about horsepower resale value and finally enjoying life. I barely heard him. Because underneath my fear, something else had begun growing stronger. Clarity. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was survival. At around 12:40 in the morning, Michael finally passed out in the recliner. The television flickered silently across his sleeping face. I stood there watching him for a long time. The man snoring softly in that chair had once held my hand during childbirth. Once danced with me in our kitchen at midnight. Once promised we'd grow old together. Now I felt like I was staring at a stranger wearing my husband's face. Quietly, I grabbed the folder containing the Corvette paperwork. Proof of shared marital funds, copies of the forged signatures, Evelyn's dealership contact information. Then I walked into the garage. The Corvette gleamed under the overhead lights like a ruby. My heart pounded so violently, I thought I might faint. I hadn't driven a sports car in my life. I barely drove at night anymore unless absolutely necessary. And now, at 62 years old, I was preparing to disappear into the darkness with my husband's prized possession while he slept 10 feet away inside the house. I almost turned back. For one terrifying second, panic flooded me. What if Michael woke up? What if the police got involved? What if I crashed? Then another thought came quietly into my mind. What if I did nothing? What if 6 months from now, Michael had completely emptied every account while building a new life with Vanessa? What if I lost everything because I was too afraid to protect myself? That fear finally pushed me forward. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather smelled brand new. Michael had loved this car immediately. I remembered the way his face lit up when he first brought it home. More excitement than I'd seen from him in years. Funny, isn't it? A woman can spend decades trying to keep a marriage alive, while another woman and a sports car receive all the passion left inside a man. My hands trembled as I started the engine. The roar echoed through the garage. I froze instantly. Inside the house, silence. No movement. No footsteps. Michael kept sleeping. Slowly, carefully, I backed the Corvette out into the driveway. Cold night air rushed around me. My entire body shook with adrenaline. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "You okay?" I stared at the message for a second before replying. "Leaving now." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Remember, this is not theft. This is asset protection. Stay calm." I swallowed hard. Asset protection. That phrase steadied me somehow. I pulled away from the curb just after 1:17 in the morning. The streets were mostly empty. Downtown Columbus shimmered in the distance, while rain from earlier that evening still reflected across the pavement. Every red light felt unbearable. Every passing car looked suspicious. I kept imagining Michael waking up and realizing the Corvette was gone. Imagining him running through the house, screaming my name. Imagining his panic. For once, I wanted him to feel uncertainty too. After 30 minutes, I arrived at a private luxury auto dealership outside the city. A tall man in a dark coat stood waiting near the entrance. Evelyn's contact. He checked the paperwork quietly while I stood under harsh fluorescent lights, trying not to fall apart. Finally, he nodded. "We can process this tonight." My throat tightened. Tonight? This was real. The man glanced toward me sympathetically. "You sure about this?" I thought about the apartment, the forged signatures, the missing retirement money, Vanessa wearing diamond jewelry bought with my future. Then I pictured Michael asleep peacefully while believing I'd never fight back. "Yes," I answered softly. For the first time in weeks, my voice didn't shake. "I'm sure." I was back home before sunrise. The empty space in the garage looked surreal. For nearly a minute, I just stood there staring at it while cold morning air drifted through the open garage door. No red Corvette, no symbol of Michael's arrogance, no trophy purchased with my stolen future. Just silence. My pulse still hadn't settled from the drive back from the dealership. Every nerve in my body felt stretched tight with adrenaline and fear. I quietly closed the garage door and walked inside. Michael was still asleep in the recliner, one arm hanging over the side, the television flashing muted light across his face. The sight almost made me laugh. There he was, the man who thought he controlled everything. The man who believed I was too weak to fight back. Sleeping peacefully while his precious Corvette was already halfway through processing paperwork at a private dealership. I covered him with the blanket draped over the couch out of pure habit. Then I hated myself for it immediately. Even after everything, part of me still moved like a wife. I went upstairs, showered, and changed clothes before making coffee. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Funds secured. Transfer pending by noon. Do not engage emotionally today. I stared at the message while wrapping both hands around my coffee mug. Too late for that. Emotionally, I was already shattered. What remained now was survival. Around 7:30, Michael finally woke up. I heard him groan from the living room before shuffling toward the kitchen. "Morning," he muttered. "Morning." He rubbed his eyes and grabbed the coffee pot. For one strange second, everything felt painfully normal again. Like maybe none of this had happened. Like maybe we were still just an aging married couple, beginning another ordinary Tuesday morning. Then Michael glanced toward the garage door window and froze. The confusion on his face lasted only 2 seconds. Then came panic. "What the hell?" He rushed toward the garage entrance so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee mug. The garage door rattled open. Silence. Then, "Dakota!" The scream echoed through the entire house. I remained seated at the kitchen table. Michael stormed back inside, looking wild-eyed. "Where's the Corvette?" I looked up calmly. "I sold it." The color drained from his face instantly. For a second, he genuinely looked unable to process the sentence. "You what I sold the car? That's impossible." "No," I answered quietly. "It was actually surprisingly easy." Michael stared at me like I'd slapped him. Then rage exploded across his face. "You insane woman!" He slammed both hands against the kitchen counter so hard the coffee cups rattled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I met his stare evenly. "Yes, that car was mine." "No," I said softly. "It was purchased using marital funds tied to forged authorization documents." The room went dead silent. Michael blinked. Just once. But I saw it. Fear. Real fear. "What are you talking about?" I slowly reached beside me and placed the folder onto the kitchen table. Every document neatly organized. Every transfer highlighted. Every forged signature copied. Michael stared at the papers without touching them. "You went through my things? You emptied our retirement account?" That money was being invested in Vanessa Cole's apartment. His entire body froze. There it was. The moment the lies collapsed. Michael looked at me carefully now, like he was seeing a completely different woman sitting across from him. "You've been spying on me." "No," I answered quietly. "I've been waking up." His jaw clenched hard enough to twitch. "You had no right to sell that car." I almost laughed. "No right." I opened the folder and slid the dealership paperwork toward him. "You forged my signature, Michael." "I did not forge anything. You used my authorization electronically on financial transfers and vehicle documents without my consent." His face darkened instantly. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about." Michael began pacing the kitchen. "This is unbelievable. After everything I've done for this family. For this family." My voice cracked sharply for the first time. "You bought your mistress a luxury apartment with our retirement savings. That is not what happened." "Then explain Vanessa." The silence that followed told me everything. Michael stopped pacing. For one brief second, he almost looked tired. Not remorseful, just exhausted from being caught. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "You don't understand the situation." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're right," I whispered. I don't understand how someone can lie to his wife for years and still sleep peacefully beside her. Michael rubbed his forehead aggressively. You think this is black and white? I think you stole from me. That's ridiculous. You drained nearly $200,000. His voice suddenly rose. I worked for that money. We worked for that money. The force of my own voice startled both of us, because I almost never yelled, not in 27 years of marriage. Michael stared at me like he no longer recognized me. Good. I didn't recognize myself either. You've become completely irrational, he muttered. There it was again. Irrational. Crazy. Emotional. Every cheating man's favorite defense when facts corner him. I leaned forward slowly. No, Michael. I became informed. For the first time since this confrontation started, Michael looked genuinely uncertain. Then suddenly, he grabbed his phone. I'm calling the police. I blinked. What, you stole my vehicle? The audacity nearly took my breath away. You really want police involved? You committed grand theft. I stared at him in disbelief while he angrily dialed. Then something unexpected happened inside me. I stopped being afraid, completely, because suddenly I realized something important. Michael genuinely believed he was still the victim. Even now, even after everything. That level of entitlement was almost unbelievable. He spoke loudly into the phone. Yes, I need to report a stolen vehicle. Pause. My wife took it. Another pause. She sold it without my permission. He glared at me while speaking. Then his expression slowly changed. The dispatcher must have asked about ownership documentation. It's registered through shared marital accounts, he admitted tightly. Another pause. Yes, but pause again. I don't care if she's my spouse. His face grew redder by the second. Finally, he hung up furiously. What did they say? I asked quietly. Michael looked like he wanted to destroy something. They said it's a civil matter. Of course they did, because despite Michael's outrage, the Corvette wasn't legally just his. He knew that. Now law enforcement knew it too. Michael slammed the phone onto the counter. You think you've won something here? No, I answered honestly. I think I finally stopped losing. That seemed to hit him harder than yelling would have. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Michael said something that chilled me completely. You're making a very big mistake, Dakota. Not apology. Not regret. A threat. I looked at the man I'd spent almost 3 decades loving and realized something horrifying. I no longer trusted him at all. Not emotionally, not financially, not morally. Nothing remained. The front doorbell rang suddenly. Both of us jumped slightly. Michael frowned. Who the hell is that this early? I stood slowly. I don't know, but deep down, I had a terrible feeling I did. Because Michael's phone buzzed again at that exact moment. And even from across the kitchen, I saw the name flashing across the screen. Vanessa. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time, more impatient. Michael stared at his phone screen, while Vanessa's name continued flashing across it. For the first time since I'd discovered the affair, my husband looked genuinely cornered. Not angry, not arrogant, afraid. Don't answer it, he said quickly. I looked at him calmly. Why? Because I said so. That tone, that controlling, dismissive tone he'd used for months now. But something had changed between us permanently. Michael no longer had authority over me. The doorbell rang a third time, then came knocking, sharp, aggressive. Michael rushed toward the front hallway. Dakota, stop, but I was already moving. I opened the front door slowly. And there she was. Vanessa Cole looked even younger in daylight. Tall boots, designer sunglasses, perfect blonde hair, expensive cream-colored coat. The kind of woman who probably never worried about retirement accounts or grocery budgets a single day in her life. For half a second, she smiled automatically. Then she realized who I was. Her expression shifted instantly. "Oh." Behind me, Michael muttered a curse under his breath. Vanessa removed her sunglasses slowly. "I didn't realize you were home? Interesting? Not good morning, not hello, not I'm sorry, just surprise." Because clearly, Michael had painted me as the clueless older wife who existed somewhere in the background of his life. "I live here," I answered calmly. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Michael appeared behind me quickly. "Vanessa, what are you doing here?" She looked furious. "What am I doing here?" she snapped. "I've been calling you for an hour." Michael glanced nervously toward me. "We'll talk later." "No, we'll talk now." Her eyes moved past him toward the garage window. Then confusion spread across her face. "Where's the Corvette?" There it was. The moment everything exploded. Michael's jaw tightened instantly. "Vanessa, you promised we were leaving for Nashville this morning." Nashville? A trip, of course. Probably financed with more stolen money. Vanessa crossed her arms angrily. "The hotel is already booked, Michael." I watched my husband panic in real time. "Can we not do this here?" "Do what?" she snapped. "You stopped answering your phone." Then her eyes landed on me again. And suddenly, realization began forming across her face. Slowly. Dangerously. "You know," she whispered. I held her stare. "Yes." Michael stepped forward immediately. "This isn't what you think." Both Vanessa and I looked at him simultaneously. The absurdity of that almost made me laugh. Vanessa frowned. "What do you mean she knows?" Michael rubbed his forehead aggressively. "Dakota found out about us." Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. "Found out?" Then she looked back at me carefully. "How much does she know enough?" I answered quietly. For the first time since arriving, Vanessa actually looked uncomfortable. Good. She should have. Because whether she knew about the stolen retirement money or not, she still knowingly carried on with a married man. Still slept beside someone else's husband. Still smiled while another woman's life quietly collapsed. Michael stepped closer to Vanessa. "Please lower your voice." "Why?" she snapped. "Your neighbors might hear." Michael's face darkened. "This isn't helping." Vanessa laughed sharply. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is this stressful for you?" Then suddenly, she pointed toward the garage again. "Where is the car?" Michael looked toward me. Vanessa followed his eyes. Slowly, her expression changed. "No way." I crossed my arms calmly. "I sold it." Vanessa blinked. "You sold Michael's Corvette." "Our Corvette," I corrected softly. Michael exploded instantly. For the last time, Dakota stopped saying that. Vanessa looked between us with growing confusion. "What is happening?" I stared directly at her. "The Corvette was purchased using money Michael stole from our retirement account." The silence afterward felt enormous. Vanessa turned toward Michael slowly. "What, it's complicated," he muttered. "No," I interrupted quietly. "Actually, it's very simple." Michael glared at me. "Dakota, you told her we couldn't afford vacations anymore?" I continued looking directly at Vanessa now. "Meanwhile, you were paying for her luxury apartment downtown." Vanessa's face paled slightly. "I didn't know you wore jewelry purchased with my retirement savings." Michael stepped forward angrily. "Enough." But I wasn't finished. "Did he tell you he forged my signature too?" Vanessa stared at him. What is she talking about? Michael looked furious now. She's twisting things. No, I answered softly. I brought the paperwork. That seemed to genuinely shake Vanessa. You forged documents? Michael threw his hands into the air. Oh my God, this is unbelievable. Then suddenly Vanessa's expression hardened. Wait a second. She looked directly at him. You said the marriage was basically over? Michael froze. You told me she barely even noticed what you did with money. I watched my husband carefully, because this was the first time two versions of his lies were colliding publicly, and he couldn't control either woman anymore. Vanessa shook her head slowly. You told me Dakota was emotionally unstable. That one hit me harder than I expected. Michael had been building a story about me behind my back. An unstable older wife? A burden? A woman too irrational to trust. Suddenly, months of his behavior made perfect sense. He wasn't just hiding the affair. He was preparing an exit strategy. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. You said she didn't even understand your finances. Michael snapped. Can we please not do this here? But Vanessa wasn't listening anymore. What about Florida? Michael closed his eyes briefly. Vanessa, no. Seriously. Her voice rose. What about the house you said you were buying there? My stomach dropped. House. Not condo. Not apartment. A house. Michael had been planning an entire future while secretly draining ours. You promised me we'd be there by summer. I saw genuine panic flash across Michael's face now. Lower your voice. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Oh, now you care about appearances. Then she turned toward me again. For the first time, she actually looked embarrassed. I honestly didn't know about the retirement money. I studied her carefully. And strangely enough, I believed her. Vanessa knew he was married, but I don't think she fully understood the level of deception involved. Michael had lied to both of us. Just differently. He told me you two were basically roommates, she admitted quietly. I almost smiled at the predictability. Every cheating man tells the same story eventually. We're unhappy. We're disconnected. She doesn't understand me anymore. We haven't loved each other in years. As if emotional neglect somehow justifies betrayal. Michael looked trapped now, cornered from every direction. Good. For once he deserved to feel helpless. Vanessa shook her head slowly. You said the divorce was already being handled. Michael's silence answered for him. Then came the final crack. Vanessa looked toward the kitchen table where my folder still sat open. Bank statements visible. Transfer records visible. Evidence everywhere. You really took her retirement money, she whispered. Michael's voice dropped lower. I was going to replace it, when no answer. When Michael still nothing. And suddenly, something shifted in Vanessa's face. Disgust. Not heartbreak. Not sadness. Disgust. Because maybe she could tolerate cheating. Maybe she could tolerate lies. But even she seemed disturbed by the image of a man secretly draining his wife's retirement savings while pretending to build a future with another woman. Vanessa stepped backward toward the porch. I can't do this. Michael moved quickly. Vanessa, wait. No! You're overreacting! She laughed bitterly. Overreacting, her voice cracked. Your wife sold your car because you stole her future. The irony of hearing another woman defend me almost broke my brain. Michael reached for her arm. Vanessa pulled away immediately. Then she said something that silenced the entire porch. You know what's really scary? Michael stared at her. The fact that you still somehow think you're the victim here, and for the first time since all of this began. I saw genuine shame flicker across my husband's face, only for a second. But it was there. Vanessa turned and walked away without another word. Michael stood frozen in the doorway watching her leave. And somehow, despite everything, I realized losing the Corvette wasn't what truly terrified him. Losing control was. After Vanessa left the house became unbearably quiet. Michael stood frozen near the front door for several seconds, staring out the window like he still believed she might come back. She didn't. Of course she didn't. Fantasy relationships rarely survive contact with reality, especially when reality includes forged signatures, drained retirement accounts, and police threats over a missing Corvette. Finally, Michael shut the door harder than necessary. Then he turned toward me. The look in his eyes chilled me immediately. Not heartbreak, not regret, resentment. "You happy now?" he asked coldly. I stared at him in disbelief. "Happy you destroyed everything." The audacity of that sentence almost made me laugh. "No, Michael," I said quietly. "You did." He walked into the kitchen and poured himself coffee with shaking hands. For the first time since all of this began, he looked older. Not physically, emotionally, like the effort required to maintain his lies was finally exhausting him. Good. I was exhausted too. Michael took a long drink before speaking again. "You had no right involving Vanessa." "Involving her?" I repeated. "She came to our house. She didn't know all the details." I stared at him carefully, still protecting her. Even now. "Did you love her?" I asked softly. Michael looked away immediately. That answer hurt more than words. Because silence tells the truth, people are too cowardly to say out loud. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. "How long?" He rubbed his forehead. "It just happened. That's not a timeline." Michael exhaled sharply. "About a year. A year. 12 months of lies. 12 months of sleeping beside me while building another life. 12 months of kissing me goodbye before visiting another woman's apartment." My knees almost weakened hearing the truth spoken aloud, but I forced myself to stay standing. "Did you ever plan on telling me?" Michael hesitated. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. "Yes." I waited. As soon as things settled financially. Financially, not emotionally, not respectfully, conveniently. He planned to leave once he secured enough money for himself and Vanessa. The honesty of that nearly destroyed me. Before I could answer, Michael's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Vanessa. It was Ethan. Michael looked relieved instantly, like our son represented safety, control, normalcy. He answered quickly. "Hey." Pause. "No, everything's fine." I almost laughed out loud. Everything was absolutely not fine. Then Michael frowned. "What?" Another pause, when his expression darkened immediately. "Your sister called you?" I looked up sharply. "Lily, of course. She must have sensed something after Sunday dinner." Michael glanced at me while speaking. "No, your mother's being dramatic." That did it. I walked across the kitchen and snatched the phone directly from his hand. "Dakota," he snapped. I ignored him. "Ethan." Silence on the other end. "Then Mom?" His voice sounded confused. "Honey, I need you and Lily to come over. What's going on?" I looked directly at Michael. "Your father has something important he needs to explain." Michael lunged toward me. "Give me the damn phone." I stepped backward. "No. Dakota, stop this right now." I kept my eyes on him while speaking into the phone. "Please come over." Long pause. Then Ethan answered quietly. "Okay." I hung up. Michael looked furious. "What the hell are you doing? I'm done protecting your lies. They do not need to be involved." I stared at him in disbelief. "Our children deserve the truth." Michael laughed bitterly. "No. You want revenge. That word echoed inside my chest. Revenge. Was that what this was? Revenge would have been destruction for pleasure. This was exposure, truth, consequences, and deep down, Michael knew that too. The next hour crawled by painfully. Michael paced constantly. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the folder of evidence while memories kept ambushing me without warning. Michael teaching Ethan how to ride a bike. Michael crying when Lily got married. Michael holding my hand during my mother's funeral. How does someone go from that to this? I still don't fully understand. Maybe betrayal doesn't happen all at once. Maybe people slowly abandon themselves before they abandon others. At around 10:30, Lily arrived first. The second she walked inside, she froze. "Okay," she said carefully. "Something is definitely wrong." Her eyes moved between us nervously. Michael forced a smile. "Everything's fine." "Dad," she replied immediately, "you look like you're about to have a stroke." A few minutes later, Ethan and Claire arrived too. The tension in the room became immediate. Nobody sat down at first. Nobody knew how. Finally, Ethan frowned. "Can somebody please explain what's happening?" Michael answered instantly. "Your mother's overreacting about some financial issues." I almost admired his commitment to minimizing reality. Some financial issues, as if he'd accidentally overspent at Home Depot instead of secretly funding a mistress. Lily looked at me carefully. "Mom?" My throat tightened. This was the moment everything changed permanently. Once I spoke, there would be no going back. But then I remembered Michael calling me paranoid. Remembered Vanessa wearing jewelry bought with my future. Remembered the empty retirement account. And suddenly, the truth felt necessary. I opened the folder slowly. "Your father has been having an affair." The silence afterward was so complete, it almost rang in my ears. Lily blinked rapidly. Ethan stared at me like he'd misheard. I slid the photographs across the table. Michael and Vanessa outside the apartment building, holding hands, kissing. Lily covered her mouth instantly. "Oh my God!" Ethan looked physically sick. "No." Michael stepped forward quickly. "It's complicated." "No," Lily whispered, tears forming immediately. "It really isn't." Ethan kept staring at the photos. Then he looked toward his father. "Is this real?" Michael hesitated too long. That hesitation answered everything. Claire slowly sat down in stunned silence. I continued before Michael could reshape the story. "He drained our retirement account." Lily looked horrified. "What, he used the money to pay for her apartment trips, gifts?" "That's not entirely true," Michael interrupted sharply. "I pulled out the bank statements. It's exactly true." Ethan grabbed the papers quickly. As he read through the transactions, his face changed from confusion to disbelief. Then anger. Real anger. "You took almost everything," he whispered. Michael became defensive immediately. "I was going to rebuild it with what I snapped. Magic. That business deal was going to pay off." Lily shook her head slowly. "You lied to Mom for a year." Michael rubbed his forehead aggressively. "You kids don't understand how unhappy things became." There it was. The justification. The universal excuse. I wasn't happy. As if unhappiness grants permission to destroy another person. Lily started crying quietly. Claire moved beside her immediately. But Ethan remained strangely still. Then he looked at me carefully. "Mom," he said slowly. "What do you mean?" He drained the account. I handed him the transaction summaries. As Ethan read deeper, something in his expression suddenly shifted. Confusion, recognition, then guilt. His eyes widened slightly. "Oh no." I frowned. What? Ethan looked toward Michael. You told me last fall you were moving money around for tax purposes. Michael's face went pale instantly. You asked me how to transfer digital authorizations. The entire room froze. I stared at my son. What Ethan looked devastated. I didn't know, he whispered quickly. Mom, I swear to God I didn't know. Michael interrupted immediately. That has nothing to do with this. Yes, it does, Ethan snapped suddenly. All of us stared at him. Because Ethan almost never raised his voice at his father. You used me, Ethan asked quietly. Michael looked cornered again. I was trying to protect the family financially. No, I answered softly. You were protecting yourself. Then Lily asked the question nobody wanted to say out loud. Dad, were you ever going to tell Mom the truth? Michael opened his mouth, closed it again. And in that silence, our children finally understood exactly who their father had become. 3 weeks later, I sat inside a cold courtroom watching my husband avoid looking at me. The room itself was smaller than I expected. No dramatic jury. No emotional speeches like television. Just fluorescent lights, quiet tension, and the slow dismantling of a 27-year marriage. Michael sat beside his attorney, wearing a navy suit and a carefully controlled expression. From a distance, he still looked respectable, successful, trustworthy. That was the terrifying thing about people like Michael. They rarely look like villains. Evelyn Brooks sat calmly beside me reviewing paperwork while I struggled to keep my hands steady. You okay? She asked quietly. No, she nodded once. Good, that means you still understand the seriousness of this. I almost smiled despite myself. Only Evelyn could make emotional collapse sound strategic. The hearing that morning wasn't the full divorce trial yet. It was primarily focused on temporary financial orders and disclosure obligations. But according to Evelyn, this hearing mattered enormously, because today would determine whether the court believed Michael acted dishonestly with marital assets. And judging by the stack of evidence sitting in front of us, Michael was in trouble. The bailiff called our case. My stomach tightened immediately. Michael finally glanced toward me then. For one brief second, I saw something unfamiliar in his face. Not anger, not arrogance, nervousness. Good. The judge, an older woman named Judge Ramirez, reviewed documents quietly for several moments before speaking. Mrs. Brooks, she said to Evelyn, you may proceed. Evelyn stood smoothly. Your Honor, we are requesting temporary financial protections due to evidence that Mr. Hunter deliberately concealed and dissipated marital assets during the course of the marriage. Michael's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, that characterization is inflammatory. Judge Ramirez barely looked up. Sit down, Mr. Talbot. I'll decide what's inflammatory. I almost wanted to hug her. Evelyn continued calmly. We have documented withdrawals totaling nearly $200,000 from shared retirement accounts without Mrs. Hunter's informed consent. She handed copies toward the bench. Michael stared straight ahead rigidly. Not at me. Never at me. Evelyn continued. We also have evidence suggesting forged electronic authorizations tied to both financial transfers and vehicle purchases. That finally made Michael shift uncomfortably. His attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, my client disputes any implication of fraud. Evelyn nodded calmly. Then perhaps Mr. Hunter can explain why his wife's electronic authorization appears repeatedly on documents she never reviewed. Silence. Judge Ramirez adjusted her glasses while studying the paperwork. Then she looked directly at Michael. Mr. Hunter. Michael cleared his throat. My wife handled finances for years. I had access to her credentials. That answer seemed to irritate even his own attorney. Judge Ramirez frowned immediately. That is not the same thing as authorization. Michael shifted again. It was never intended maliciously. I stared at him in disbelief. Not maliciously, as though accidentally stealing retirement savings for a mistress was some unfortunate misunderstanding. Evelyn stood again. Your honor intent becomes difficult to interpret favorably when funds were used to support an extramarital relationship. Michael's attorney objected immediately. I fail to see the relevance of personal relationships here. Evelyn turned calmly. The relevance is motive. The courtroom fell silent again. Then Evelyn delivered the sentence that changed everything. We have evidence showing Mr. Hunter financially supported another residence and individual while simultaneously concealing those expenditures from his spouse. Judge Ramirez looked directly at Michael. Is that accurate? Michael hesitated. Too long, and that hesitation said more than words ever could. Yes, he muttered finally. The shame that hit me hearing him admit it publicly felt strangely different than I expected. Not satisfaction, just grief. Because once spoken aloud in court, the affair stopped being suspicion or heartbreak. It became legal fact, a documented collapse. Michael's attorney quickly stepped forward. Your Honor, while Mr. Hunter acknowledges marital difficulties, these expenditures do not eliminate his rights regarding shared assets. Evelyn nodded. We agree, which is precisely why Mrs. Hunter secured remaining liquid value before further depletion occurred. Michael looked furious instantly. There it is, he snapped suddenly. She stole my car. Judge Ramirez looked unimpressed. Our Corvette, I corrected quietly before I could stop myself. The judge glanced toward me briefly, then back at Michael. The vehicle was purchased using marital funds. Michael hesitated again. Yes, and titled jointly through marital financing structures. Another pause. Yes. Judge Ramirez leaned back slightly. Then your wife did not steal your property, Mr. Hunter. She liquidated a shared marital asset. Michael's face turned red. That car was important to me. The judge looked completely unmoved. I imagine your retirement account was important to your wife? Silence. Absolute silence. I looked down quickly because tears suddenly burned behind my eyes. Not because of the Corvette. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, someone in authority saw exactly what happened to me. Michael's attorney attempted to recover. Your Honor, my client acknowledges mistakes were made emotionally. Evelyn interrupted immediately. These were not emotional mistakes. These were calculated financial decisions. Then she placed another document before the judge. And there's more. My pulse quickened instantly. Evelyn had waited strategically before revealing Ethan's email evidence. Judge Ramirez examined the page carefully. What is this? A recovered email exchange between Mr. Hunter and his son discussing financial transfer procedures. Michael visibly stiffened. Evelyn continued calmly. In the exchange, Mr. Hunter specifically states, and I quote, "Your mother cannot know about these transfers until everything is finalized." Michael closed his eyes briefly. That tiny reaction told me even before the judge spoke. He knew he was caught. Judge Ramirez looked toward him sharply. Mr. Hunter finalized how. Michael swallowed hard. My marriage was already failing. That was not my question. Another long silence. Then finally, I intended to file for divorce eventually. Eventually. Such a cruel word. Eventually after draining the accounts. Eventually after securing property elsewhere. Eventually after replacing me emotionally and financially. Judge Ramirez looked genuinely displeased now. Did your wife know you intended to divorce her? No. The judge set the papers down slowly. Did your wife know retirement funds were being redirected to support another residence? No. Did your wife authorize these electronic signatures? Michael's silence lasted too long. Finally, no. The room felt suddenly smaller. He said it, out loud, under oath. Evelyn remained calm beside me, but I saw satisfaction flicker briefly across her face. Not cruel satisfaction, professional certainty. Michael's own words had just destroyed most of his credibility. His attorney attempted damage control immediately. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets the breakdown of communication within the marriage. Breakdown of communication, Judge Ramirez interrupted sharply. This appears to be deliberate concealment. Michael finally looked toward me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time in months, I saw something besides arrogance in his eyes. Fear. Real fear. Not of losing Vanessa. Not of losing the Corvette. Fear of consequences. The hearing continued another hour with financial disclosures and temporary orders. By the end, the judge issued temporary restrictions on major financial transfers. Mandatory disclosure of all hidden assets. Review of potential reimbursement claims tied to marital dissipation. Preservation orders regarding remaining accounts. Michael looked stunned. Like he genuinely never believed things would reach this point. As we stood to leave, he quietly said my name for the first time all morning. Dakota. I stopped. Not because I wanted to. Because 27 years of habit still responded automatically to his voice. Michael looked exhausted suddenly. Older, smaller. This got out of control. I stared at him for several seconds. Then I answered honestly. No, Michael. My voice stayed calm. You just finally lost control of it, and for the first time since I married him. I walked away without waiting for him beside me. Michael lost Vanessa 3 days after the court hearing. I know because he told me himself, not intentionally, accidentally. The way people reveal truths when desperation finally strips away their pride. By then, he was staying in the guest bedroom downstairs because neither of us could tolerate sleeping beside the other anymore. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, by memories. 27 years of them lingering in every room. Sometimes, I'd walk past the hallway closet and suddenly remember Michael helping Lily hide Christmas presents there when she was 8. Then, 2 seconds later, I'd remember him kissing Vanessa outside her luxury apartment. The emotional whiplash was exhausting. Ethan and Lily had both become strangely quiet since the hearing. Lily called me almost daily now, not constantly asking questions. Just checking whether I'd eaten, whether I'd slept, whether I was okay. Ethan struggled more. I think part of him still couldn't fully reconcile the father he loved with the man revealed in court. Honestly, neither could I. That Thursday night, I was sitting on the back patio, wrapped in a blanket, when the sliding door opened behind me. Michael stepped outside slowly. For weeks, every interaction between us had carried tension sharp enough to cut skin. But tonight, he looked different. Deflated. There were dark circles under his eyes now. He'd lost weight, and for the first time in months, he looked his actual age. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I stared out at the dark backyard. We've done enough talking. Michael remained standing awkwardly near the door. Vanessa left. I closed my eyes briefly, not because I was surprised, because hearing it still hurt somehow. Not jealousy, just another confirmation that my marriage had truly ended. What happened? I asked flatly. Michael laughed bitterly. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. The irony nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. He walked farther onto the patio. She said everything became too ugly after court. Of course it did. Affairs survive inside fantasy, not legal documents and financial disclosures. Michael leaned against the railing. She moved out of the apartment yesterday. I stayed silent. Then he whispered something that genuinely shocked me. I think she loved the version of me I pretended to be. That sentence lingered heavily between us. Because underneath all my anger, I knew exactly what he meant. Vanessa never truly knew Michael. Neither did I, apparently. Michael rubbed his face tiredly. I screwed everything up. There it was. The closest thing to accountability I'd heard from him yet. But strangely enough, it didn't satisfy me. Because apologies after consequences rarely feel pure. They feel lonely. I turned toward him slowly. Did you ever love her? Michael stared out into the darkness for a long time before answering. I loved how she made me feel. Honest. Painfully honest. She looked at me like I still mattered, he admitted quietly. Like I wasn't getting old. The vulnerability in his voice almost softened me for one dangerous second. Then I remembered my retirement account. You think I didn't get older too? I asked quietly. Michael looked at me. I know. No, you don't. My voice cracked despite myself. Do you have any idea what it feels like watching your husband slowly stop seeing you? He opened his mouth. I kept going. You stopped touching me years ago unless it was habit. You stopped listening when I talked. You made me feel invisible inside my own marriage. Michael lowered his eyes, and instead of telling me the truth, I whispered, You replaced me. The silence afterward felt endless. Finally, Michael sat down across from me. I never planned for this to happen. I almost laughed. Men always say that, as if betrayal simply appears one morning like bad weather. You rented another woman an apartment. Michael swallowed hard. I know. You forged my signature. I know. You drained our retirement. His voice became quieter. I was going to fix it. I stared at him in disbelief. How? No answer. Exactly. There was never really a plan. Only selfishness stretched across months of lies. Michael suddenly looked directly at me. I miss my family. That sentence finally made something inside me harden permanently. Because even now, he still centered his own loss. Not my humiliation, not my fear, not the destruction he caused. His loneliness. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. You should have thought about that before. Michael looked genuinely pained. I made mistakes. No, I said softly. You made choices. That hit him harder than yelling ever could have. Because mistakes sound accidental. Choices sound intentional. And deep down, Michael knew exactly what he'd chosen every step of the way. The cold wind moved through the yard quietly. Finally, Michael spoke again. What happens now? I looked at him carefully. You really don't know, us? There was no us anymore. And I think for the first time, he finally understood that. Not emotionally. Actually understood it. No more hidden apartment. No more Corvette. No more family dinners pretending everything was normal. No more loyal wife waiting quietly at home while he lived two lives. Just consequences. Real ones. I filed the updated separation paperwork this morning, I said calmly. Michael's face fell immediately. So, that's it? I almost asked him the same thing. So that's it. 27 years reduced to legal paperwork and divided accounts. But the truth was uglier. The marriage hadn't ended in court. It ended the moment Michael decided my trust was expendable. I can't survive another betrayal from you, I admitted quietly. Michael stared at me. I said I was sorry. And I believe you are. His expression shifted slightly with surprise. But being sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Tears finally appeared in his eyes then. Real ones. Not manipulative, not performative. And somehow that hurt more than anger. Because part of me had waited weeks to see remorse from him. Now that it finally arrived, it was too late to matter. Michael wiped his face roughly. I don't even recognize my life anymore. I looked at him carefully. Neither do I. We sat there in silence for several minutes. Then Michael quietly asked, "Do the kids hate me?" I thought about Ethan avoiding his father's calls. About Lily crying in my kitchen after the hearing. About Claire whispering that she never imagined Michael capable of this. No, I answered honestly. They're disappointed. Michael closed his eyes. And hurt. He nodded slowly. I never wanted to hurt them. But you did. The truth sat heavily between us. Eventually, Michael stood to leave. Halfway to the sliding door, he stopped. Dakota. I looked up. I really did love you. Tears burned my eyes instantly, because I believed him. That was the tragedy of it all. I think Michael truly did love me once, just not enough to protect me from himself. After he went inside, I stayed on the patio alone for another hour, listening to the wind move through the trees. And for the first time since all of this began, I stopped grieving the marriage I thought I lost. Because finally, I understood something important. That marriage had already disappeared long before I discovered Vanessa. I had simply been the last person to know. 6 months after I sold the Corvette, I stood on the porch of my new house in northern Michigan, holding a cup of coffee while snow drifted quietly across the lake. The silence felt different here. Not lonely. Peaceful. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts without tension living underneath them. The cottage wasn't large. Just a modest 2-bedroom home near Traverse City with faded blue shutters and a wooden dock stretching into the water behind it. 20 years earlier, during a road trip anniversary weekend, I once told Michael this was where I wanted to retire someday. Back then, he kissed my forehead and said, "One day, Dakota." I promise. Funny how life works. I still ended up here, just not with him. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but the separation agreement and court orders had already changed everything. Thanks to Evelyn's work, much of the remaining marital property had been protected before Michael could move additional assets. The court ordered financial restitution tied to the retirement withdrawals. Michael was furious at first, then exhausted. Eventually, he simply stopped fighting as aggressively. I think losing Vanessa shattered whatever fantasy had been driving him. Reality finally arrived. And reality is expensive, especially after betrayal. I sold the Columbus house 3 months earlier. Walking through those empty rooms for the final time nearly destroyed me. Not because I wanted to stay married, because every wall held pieces of my children growing up. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, late-night talks in the kitchen. The ghost of a life I thought would last forever. Lily cried harder than I did during the closing. Ethan carried boxes silently for almost an entire day before finally stopping in the driveway and whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom." I looked at him carefully. For what? For not seeing it sooner? God. That broke me completely, because my son had carried guilt for months after discovering Michael used his help understanding electronic transfers. I hugged him right there between moving boxes while both of us cried. "You were manipulated too," I told him firmly. But I defended him. You defended the father you thought you knew. That mattered. There's a difference. The relationship between Ethan and Michael remained strained now. Not hateful, just wounded. Trust changes shape after betrayal. especially between fathers and sons. Lily visited me in Michigan twice already. Each time she brought too much food and worried over me like I might collapse if left alone too long. "You know," she said during her last visit while helping me unpack kitchen dishes, "you seem lighter here." I thought about that for a long moment. She was right. I did feel lighter. Not because pain disappeared, because fear did. For years, I lived carefully, quietly, responsibly, always prioritizing stability over myself. Now, for the first time in decades, every decision belonged entirely to me. That realization felt terrifying at first, then intoxicating. Around the same time, I moved. Evelyn unexpectedly called me with an opportunity. One of her older clients, a widow recovering from financial abuse by her adult son, needed help organizing retirement documents and budgeting paperwork. "You're good with people," Evelyn told me. "And frankly, women trust women who've survived things." At first I hesitated. I was 62 years old. Who starts over professionally at 62? Apparently me. The first woman I helped cried halfway through our meeting. Not because of spreadsheets, because she was ashamed. Ashamed she ignored warning signs. Ashamed she trusted someone who exploited her kindness. I understood that shame intimately. And suddenly, all my years managing household finances, supporting Michael's business, balancing budgets, and surviving betrayal became useful again. Within a few months, referrals started spreading quietly. Mostly older women. Widows. Recently divorced wives. Women who spent decades letting someone else control the money because they believed love guaranteed safety. I never judged them. How could I? I had once believed the exact same thing. One snowy afternoon, after finishing paperwork for a client, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope addressed in Michael's handwriting. Just seeing it tightened my chest immediately. I carried it inside but left it unopened on the kitchen counter for nearly 2 hours. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Another part still needed to know. Eventually, I sat near the fireplace and opened it carefully. The letter was 6 pages long. Classic Michael. Even his apologies needed too many words. He wrote about regret, loneliness, losing Vanessa, missing the family, realizing too late what truly mattered. At one point, he admitted I kept chasing youth because I was terrified of becoming invisible. That sentence stayed with me, because underneath all the anger, I finally understood something heartbreaking about Michael. He wasn't evil in the dramatic movie villain sense. He was weak. Weak enough to trade integrity for validation. Weak enough to mistake attention for love. Weak enough to destroy loyal people trying to escape his own fear of aging. The letter ended with this: "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you remember. I wasn't always this man." I stared at those words for a very long time. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I finally understood something important. I didn't need to hate Michael forever in order to leave him behind. That was the real freedom. Not revenge, not punishment. Peace. A few weeks later, Ethan came to visit alone. We sat on the dock wrapped in winter coats while snow drifted across the frozen lake. After nearly an hour of quiet conversation, he finally asked the question I think he'd been carrying for months. "Do you still love Dad?" I looked out over the water thoughtfully. "That's a complicated question." Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't know how to feel about him anymore. Neither did I sometimes. Because healing isn't clean. You can mourn someone and resent them simultaneously. You can remember beautiful moments while still acknowledging devastating truths. I think I said carefully, "Your father lost himself for a while." Ethan stared at the ice quietly. "Do you think he regrets it?" I thought about the letter, about Michael crying on the patio, about the emptiness in his face after Vanessa left. Yes, I answered honestly. Then why doesn't that make things better? That question nearly broke my heart, because regret repairs so little once trust is destroyed. I squeezed my son's hand gently. Some damage changes people forever. That evening, after Ethan left, I stood alone on the porch, watching snow fall across the lake again. For the first time in nearly a year, I realized something surprising. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for closure, not for Michael to become the man he used to be. Because somewhere between losing the Corvette, losing the marriage, losing the house, and rebuilding my life, I had finally found myself again. The divorce became official on a rainy Thursday morning in April. No dramatic courtroom speech, no final screaming match, just signatures, paperwork, and the quiet ending of a life I once believed would last forever. I sat beside Evelyn Brooks one final time while the judge reviewed the settlement terms. Because of the financial misconduct findings, I recovered a significant portion of the retirement funds Michael tried to hide. The court also awarded additional compensation tied to the unauthorized transfers and forged signatures. Ironically, the Corvette ended up becoming one of the strongest legal symbols in the entire case. Not because of the car itself, because it proved intent. It proved Michael wasn't making emotional mistakes. He was building another life while dismantling ours in secret. When the hearing ended, Evelyn squeezed my shoulder gently. "You survived it." I smiled weakly. "Barely." She shook her head. "No, Dakota. Barely surviving looks very different from this." I understood what she meant later that afternoon while driving back toward Michigan. The sky slowly cleared after hours of rain, and somewhere along the highway, I realized something strange. I wasn't grieving anymore. Not the same way. There was sadness, yes. Some wounds never fully disappear, but grief no longer controlled every thought. The sharpest pain had finally softened into memory. And memory, unlike heartbreak, allows room for peace. A month later, Ethan called unexpectedly. "Don't make plans Saturday," he said. "Why, you'll see?" His voice sounded nervous. Saturday morning, both Ethan and Lily arrived at my cottage together. Lily carried pastries. Ethan looked like he was preparing for surgery. "What's going on?" I asked suspiciously. "Come outside," Lily said immediately. I followed them toward the driveway and froze. Parked near the road was a dark blue 1968 Ford Mustang convertible. Not flashy, not aggressive. Classic. Beautiful. My hand immediately flew to my mouth. "Ethan!" He shoved his hands awkwardly into his pockets. "It's not new," he said quickly. "And it's definitely not a Corvette." I laughed through sudden tears. "What is this?" Lily smiled softly. "You once told us Grandpa used to drive one when you were little." I stared at the car in disbelief. Years ago, I mentioned loving old Mustangs because they reminded me of childhood summers with my father. I never imagined my children remembered. Ethan stepped closer carefully. "You spent your whole life sacrificing things for everybody else," he said quietly. "We just wanted you to finally have something that belongs to you." That completely shattered me. I started crying right there in the driveway, while Lily wrapped her arms around me. Not because of the car, because after everything Michael destroyed, my children still saw me, still loved me, still wanted me to feel joy again. Later that afternoon, the three of us drove along the lakeshore with the top down despite the cold wind. And for the first time in years, I laughed without forcing it. Real laughter. The kind that rises naturally from somewhere deep and free. At one point, Lily reached over and squeezed my hand. You seem different. I am different, and I meant it. Pain changes you, but survival changes you too. That evening, after the kids left, I sat alone on the porch watching sunset colors spill across the lake. My phone buzzed unexpectedly. Michael. I stared at the screen for several seconds. We barely spoke anymore outside occasional legal logistics. Still, I answered. Hello, silence, at first. Then Ethan sent me a picture. I looked toward the Mustang, parked quietly near the driveway. Oh. Michael exhaled softly. You look happy. The sadness in his voice surprised me, not because I missed him. Because once upon a time, hearing him sound lonely would have destroyed me. Now it simply made me quiet. How are you? He asked carefully. It was such a strange question after everything. I thought about answering politely, briefly. But instead, I told the truth. I'm finally peaceful. Silence again. Then Michael laughed once, not bitterly, almost sadly. You know, he said, I used to think that Corvette meant I still had time. I listened quietly. That car made me feel young, he admitted, important, wanted. His honesty no longer frightened me now. Maybe because it no longer controlled me. But losing it, he continued slowly, that was the first moment I realized I'd already lost far more valuable things. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The truth underneath everything. The Corvette was never really about the car. It was about ego, fear, aging, escape. Michael spent so much energy trying to outrun growing older that he destroyed the people willing to grow older beside him. I'm sorry, Dakota, he whispered finally. A year earlier, hearing those words would have meant everything. Now they felt gentle, distant, like hearing echoes from another life. I know, I answered softly. And strangely enough, I did believe him. We talked only a few minutes longer before ending the call. No promises, no reconciliation, no dramatic closure, just two older people finally standing in the truth of what happened. Afterward, I sat outside until darkness settled completely across the lake. The Mustang gleamed softly under the porch light. And suddenly, I thought back to that night in the garage months earlier. The night I stood trembling beside Michael's Corvette with stolen keys in my pocket. Back then, I thought selling that car was revenge. Now, I understood it differently. Selling the Corvette wasn't about punishment. It was the moment I stopped asking permission to protect myself. The moment I finally understood that loyalty should never require self-destruction. The moment I chose my own future before someone else could steal the rest of it. And honestly, I think that decision saved my life. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that love alone cannot save a relationship when respect disappears. For years, I believed loyalty meant enduring almost anything. I thought being a good wife meant staying quiet, sacrificing more, forgiving faster, and trusting deeper. But real love should never require you to abandon yourself completely. If someone truly loves you, they protect your dignity, not just your comfort. They protect your trust when you're not looking. They don't build secret lives while you're busy building a future together. What happened to me taught me something I wish more women understood earlier. Growing older does not make you less valuable. Your kindness is not weakness. Your loyalty is not foolishness. And starting over is possible at any age. Yes, betrayal broke my heart, but surviving it rebuilt my life. So, if you're watching this while going through your own heartbreak, please remember this: losing someone who betrayed you is not the end of your story. Sometimes it's the beginning of finally finding yourself again. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or disappointment? And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every comment, and your stories remind people they are never alone in what they're facing.